Greetings. Thank you for attending the STC Washington, D.C. Baltimore's Masterclass in Tech Comm speaker series featuring experiments and use cases for AI from a tech writer's perspective by internationally renowned industry leader, Tom Johnson. Tom is an API technical writer based in Seattle, Washington, and he has a well-known blog, I'd Rather Be Writing, where he discusses topics such as technical writing, technical communication, software documentation. So if you haven't been on the site, please ensure to check it out and subscribe. Tom will be taking questions throughout the presentation. So if you have a question, please feel free to put your hand up or write it in the chat. My name is Tavia, and I'm the president for the STCW DCB chapter, and I will make sure to monitor and bring it to Tom's attention so that you can ask in real time. We will also have a Q&A session for you to continue to ask Tom questions. So please join me in welcoming Tom Johnson. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I'm going to stand up. I was sitting. I appreciate you coming to this webinar, and hopefully I'll have some good information to share. Feel free to interrupt me at any time when you have questions or things you want to comment on. I really prefer more of an interactive discussion sometimes rather than just straightforward lecture or presentation. So feel free. And thanks, Tavia. And like she said, my website, I'dratherbewriting.com, has a lot of resources, and that's where I write and publish a lot of podcasts and other things. Today, I will be talking about use cases for AI. And why am I talking about this? Well, in general, I've noticed a trend lately in AI conversations. That trend is that a lot of people are asking right now what the use cases are for AI. There's a sense that AI is this super transformative, amazing new technology, and everybody's talking about it, and there's a lot of hype and buzz, and yet in most people's day-to-day work, they still really aren't using it, or they don't really see like how to use it or what the big deal is. And so there's this disconnect between this news hype and the actual practice, and kind of experience with it. And that leads people to think, well, gosh, am I just not understanding how it can be used? Am I using it in the wrong scenarios? Have I not yet discovered the best way to use AI? Is something wrong with me? Or are these tools just overhyped? Is it a bunch of, false promise? What's going on here? And I've been there's lots of different like discussion groups that seem to be going on in workplaces where people are getting together and they're brainstorming and they're trying to figure out, well, what are the use cases for AI? At least that's sort of the current vibe that I'm getting. And so in this presentation, what I want to do is really just try to outline what are some ways you can use AI. I want to be practical. I want to be real, transparent as much as I can, and give you practical tips or other sort of advice. All right. I do think, though, that the use cases for AI are almost like asking what are the use cases for computers or the internet. As soon as you sort of catch the AI bug, I think you'll start to see that like there are many different use cases. I was starting to list out all the different ways that I was using AI in different scenarios. And I have a post there called 30 plus ways I'm using AI in everyday writing life as a technical writer, blogger, curious human. Now, granted, I'm frequently doing writing projects, right? Both at work. We all are, I imagine. I'm also blogging a lot. So outside of work, I have a lot of writing projects. So I've got a strong use case for using AI. But even apart from writing projects, I just find them interesting I like to ask questions. I like to learn about the world around me. And honestly, I mean, in any case that you might search for something on the web, AI tools can provide kind of a more conversational experience, a way to learn in anything. And so as long as you're trying to learn about something, AI tools provide a really compelling interface because you can really have this conversation, this back and forth. You can ask very specific, detailed questions, get very detailed answers. And yes, there's a potential that they're just misleading and so on. But most of the time, they're intriguing. They're worthwhile. Okay, so that said, I do think there are certain tasks where AI tools really excel, and these are the sort of activities in which I think they do well. Pattern matching. I mean, this is the bread and butter of how these tools work. And so, if you can cast your scenario as a kind of pattern that you're trying to match, that tends to have the best outcome. Classification is also very like they do great at this. And I'm going to get into more specifics here in a minute. I just wanted to hit these high level kind of categories of thinking where I think these tools do a great job. Um, another area is summarization. Lift this mic up a little bit. Okay. Summarization. This is also like one of their superpowers. Definition, which is just another kind of summarization. Comparison, any kind of task where you're comparing two things. I think these tools hit it out of the park. Examples, really worthwhile, as well as simplification. This is probably one of my favorites, is simplifying complicated, complex concepts. Formatting, general coding, and general explanations. I put the word general there because as long as it's something that you might find on the web, it tends to be pretty knowledgeable about that. Okay, so these are the tasks where AI tools really do well, but let me get more concrete into the scenarios where I think, if you're starting out and you're like, I don't really get it. Well, here are some more concrete ways. Develop and I'm going to jump into each one of these sections, so I'm not probably not going to go through them in detail here, but we're going to talk about each of these scenarios, how I've used it, what my thoughts are, what are the kind of benefits and the risks, and so on. Okay, so let's jump into this first one. Developing, build, and publishing scripts. This is probably one of my favorite uses of AI. Um, we have I have a certain doc scenario that involves building reference documentation. There's a lot of different commands. Then you have to transfer the files to another location. And if you walk through this command by command, it probably takes 10 minutes if you know what you're doing, 20 minutes if you don't, or longer if you're just figuring it out. Um, and I was able to kind of take all these steps and put them into a shell script that I could run, and it reduced the process down to just a couple of minutes. It's probably one of the biggest wins that I've had with AI because every time I have to rebuild the docs, it's literally a one-click process. And it has empowered other tech writers to equally build and publish the docs. They can make changes in the source and easily build out the output, see what it looks like, maybe make more changes into the source. In this case, sources like Java files and so on, but there's other scripts for proto files. A lot of times tech writers don't want to work in the source content, but really, if you're working with API documentation, you're generating out the reference material, the ability to easily build and publish that reference can be a huge time saver and make both you and your team and engineers really efficient. And the way that different scripts have varying levels of complexity, but for the Java doc one, there were really a lot of steps, and I didn't know that much about shell scripting. Probably could have used other processes too. other languages, but I was able to kind of go section by section, and that's the key to pretty much anything. If you have a complex task, how can you break it up? And then just use some of these AI tools to get general coding advice. You can always generalize processes so that they're not, revealing confidential info, and test out to see if they work. It's actually a lot of fun. Just the whole empowerment to be able to code something, and to build little scripts or even apps or other sort of technological processes is very empowering, and it allows us to do things that maybe in the past we had to rely more on engineers to do. There's a lot of amateurs and novices suddenly building and publishing things, tackling more complex technical processes. I'm always looking for like scenarios that I can automate something, or ways that I can, I don't know, have a chance to build a script for it, see if I can actually do it. So it's a lot of fun. By the way, at each of these slides, there's a little more info link. It takes you to my blog with more info about the topic. And I will monitor the chat every now and then, but generally I'm not looking at it all the time. Okay, another another big win for using AI tools is to understand the meaning of code. Let's say that an engineer sends you sample code for how to use an API or something, and they don't really explain much of it, and it looks kind of opaque. Paste it into an AI tool, ask for an explanation, and they do a great job at breaking it down. Um, you can even create your own little courses around the material. For example, let's say you wanted to understand the syntax of Java doc tags. You could ask the AI tool to build a like mini course that really dives into Java doc tags, and learn all about it, or just like how understanding the different syntax in code. An engineer sent me something the other day, and I was looking at it, and I saw some um, like symbols used in the code that I wasn't that familiar with, and I didn't know exactly what they were, if they were shorthand, if that was the real code or what. And I was able to kind of understand and learn about it, and I was like, oh, okay, now I get what's going on. And this is really the main way that I'm using these tools is to learn something. Sure, you could probably generate code examples for an API, but that's a lot more risky than just trying to understand what's going on in existing code. If you wanted to just generate out the code, you'd really have to kind of review it with engineers or understand what's going on at a deeper level, so that you're not just creating, bad code. All right, let's go on to the next point. Distilling needed updates from bug threads. I really find this useful. Let's say that there's, and by bug threads, and doc bugs, let's say that there's some existing problem with the docs. Maybe a field is really unclear, or maybe a field is misleading, and there's a big old discussion about it. Maybe partners were like, "Hey, we thought the field meant this," and the engineer said, "No, it really means something different, but it's way more complicated," and that wasn't reflected. And there's this big thread that's like has 75 comments, and there's links to 5 different engineering docs that are each like 5 to 10 pages, and email conversations and so on. Can be a lot of It can be very tedious to really try to sort out what was the issue, what was the resolution, what are the updates that need to be made in the docs. The ability to kind of paste all this information into an AI tool and say, hey, quickly identify what this issue is about, can be a great way to sort of get a jump start on understanding that. Obviously, you probably wouldn't want to rely entirely on what the AI tool says, but it can be a good way to see a Cliff Notes version of the content. And then if you do read through it and skim through it, you can confirm whether that what the AI tool identified matches up with what's in the thread. In the same way that, like, let's say you're reading Shakespeare, And I remember one day my daughter came home. She was reading Macbeth in high school, and she was just completely lost. And uh, we were trying to help her, and basically, um, my wife's like, "You're going about this wrong. You don't just start Shakespeare by reading Shakespeare. You start with Cliff Notes, with a high level summary, even a YouTube high level video about to understand what this play is about. And then once you have that high level understanding, then you dive into the details. It's the same way with technical information. A bug thread is basically like starting to read Shakespeare. It's going to be hard to make your way through it. But if you have that high level version and understanding, then it's much easier to understand the details.
Okay, Tom, you have a question in the chat. It's from
Great.
Mitza Hauser, and
Okay.
she asked, will it work if the code is protected and cannot be read outside the company?
Yeah, so we should probably talk briefly about just permissions on AI tools. Different companies will have different permissions about what information you can paste into tools. You should recognize that most AI tools, essentially, when you have information in them, you paste information in them, it's equivalent to basically posting it on a public chat forum. Um, Potentially, the information could be used in the training data and so on, and you don't want that. So look at your company's information security policies, see what tools are allowed to be used. Maybe you have an internal tool. Maybe there's certain ways you can turn off information sharing in different tools that are allowed. But yeah, definitely see what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do, because it's not as if you're just pasting content into a search engine. Really, the content you paste could violate information security, could be exposed and shared and so on. What you could do in many cases, if that's a roadblocker, is you could generalize the content. Depends on what you're asking about, but you could always Greek code if you're just trying to understand a format, and go from there. But more and more access is opening up, so I think you'll see the acceleration pick up, and more access to the better tools. Obviously, some of the best tools out there are the ones that are online, and maybe not the ones that you're maybe allowed to use yet inside your company, but that'll soon change, I'm guessing. All right, another major use case here is to create summaries. This is one of the superpowers of AI tools. Um, I in my website, I have a API doc course with like 18 chapters. Each chapter has a summary. As a way to sort of practice this, I was trying to paste the whole chapter into one of the AI tools that accepts a large input, one called Claude, CLAUDE.ai by Anthropic. It used to be I think it still is. I think it accepts the most like input, although ChatGPT and other tools now accept a larger input as well. But um, I would paste in this large chapter, say, hey, provide a one paragraph summary of this. And it's actually great as a first draft. The summaries weren't flawless. It's not like you can expect perfect output, but it was nice to have a first draft. I find that summaries can be really hard to write because it requires you to take details from so many different pages and somehow compress them into some fluid expression that encapsulates what the whole thing is about in a few sentences. It's not easy, and just having a tool that takes a first stab at that can be very helpful, and then you can modify it. There are some pitfalls or risks. The summary can sound very third person, like the article discusses this and that, and I dislike that approach, but I still find it very valuable. All right, another huge uh, like superpower of AI tools or great use case is to synthesize insights from a lot of different pieces of data. Now, I think that the best use case would be if you have a lot of user feedback and you're trying to extrapolate what the larger messages and themes are of that feedback. let's say you have 250 little comments from users and you're trying to figure out, well, what's the gist? What's the trend? That would be a great way to use it. And somebody reached out to me and said that's how they're using AI tools and they've had good success. I don't really work with user comments like that, so haven't really done that much. What I do uh, have, I know this is going to sound a little odd, but have a book club at work. And after reading a book, I'll often compile a lot of my favorite passages from the book. And then I want to try to extrapolate like or extract what are the main themes that these passages are getting at. And at a high level, pick 7 or 8 of the main themes from these 50 different quotations from the book and kind of move up to a higher level. In UX circles, this is really called affinity diagramming. You start with like 1,000 post-it notes on a board and you try to like group them into main themes to try to understand at a higher level what the individual data is talking about. All right, another big use case is arranging content into information type patterns. Um, with this idea, let's say you have a bunch of notes on like authorization for an API or something. You have a bunch of notes, unstructured content. From that unstructured content, you identify a template. Let's say you're writing a task and you say, well, I want the task to start with like an introduction of what the task is about, what it's accomplishing. And then I want a prerequisite section. And then I want a step section, or sorry, I don't know, a verb section with steps. And at the end of the steps, I want a results. And then after that, I want a section that's like related resources and troubleshooting and so on. So you can define exactly what the template is that you want the information to be organized into. And you can also define other things like, let's say you have rules where you want information to be structured mostly as sequential steps or as bulleted lists. You want the sentences to be clear and short and easy to understand and so on. So you can identify all these different facets of the prompt. You say, here's my audience. Here are the stylistic rules. Here's the information type or the pattern that I want you to populate. Now take all this unstructured content that's just this brain dump of notes and make it fit this template and the rules that I've given you. This is often referred to as structured prompting, where you're being very explicit about all the different outputs or the different facets of your prompt. And it could be potentially a good approach. I don't find this as useful as I thought I would. Um, but but I know there's a lot of people who are really emphasizing this approach as like a very powerful way to use these tools. I think Lance Cummings is a person who's writing a course about this approach or something like it, and is definitely can be very powerful. It makes you aware of the sort of discourse patterns behind tech comm speech. And there's a project called the Good Docs Project that has a lot of great templates that you could basically just use as the structure to your content. I think we'll see more of these kind of more of this approach baked into authoring tools where you let's say you're writing not just a task, but maybe you have a glossary topic, all the data information types. You got a reference information, you got a conceptual information, you've got troubleshooting information. They all follow certain patterns, and you can enforce and emphasize those patterns in your prompts. Again, feel free to ask me questions or make comments. I'm happy to take a look at them as I'm going here. All right, another great use case is to get advice on grammar and style. Now, notice I didn't say just have AI tools write your content for you. I do find that like a lot of AI tools, um, it's kind of a conundrum about why the output is not more compelling than it is. But the wording can be a bit verbose, kind of like general. When you use these tools enough, you get the sense of when something is written by an AI, and you can start to easily identify it because there's a certain style. And that's probably most common with Chat GPT. Tends to be very wordy. I think some of the other AI tools have more smooth language, honestly, more plain, easy to read language. But regardless, I think it's very helpful to just get advice on grammar and style. Let's say you have two different sentences, you paste them into an AI tool and you say which one is better. There's a ton of subtle nuances between different structures of sentences, small stylistic differences that maybe they relate to a rule, maybe they don't. But just to get feedback on like what's preferable can be very helpful. And especially if you're giving actual like a critique of something, let's say you're reviewing a doc your peer has written, you don't want to just write, hey, it sounds better this way, or hey, change it to this style just because that's what I like. You want to be able to reference and say, hey, this, you know, this grammar rule says you should do it like that, or our style guide recommends this approach because of X, Y, and Z. It's much better. Let's see.
Tom, so
Yeah,
sorry.
I see the
Nits.
comment.
Okay.
I think at this point, Acrolinks is still better. Could be. Yeah, I haven't honestly used Acrolinks that much. So, I, yeah, I know there are a lot of other tools. I've used Grammarly a lot just on my blog and so on. And it is nice to have things flagged and rules easily compartmentalized like that.
And then
Um,
Kevin O'Brien has his hand raised.
oh, go for it, Kevin.
Hi, Tom. What do you mean by a positive filter makes it embrace alternative styles? Are the risks there?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't really explain that. Um, Basically, these AI tools tend to be very agreeable and they will be much more tolerant towards different styles, even if your company's style guide or your own rules are a little bit more strict. I think they're a lot more lenient and tolerant and might say, yeah, both these sentences are fine. They're good. They could be, they're both be interpreted equally well. I'll talk more about this risk a little bit later, but in summary, there's a strong sort of fear that a lot of tech companies have about having bias in the AIs. And so they've been almost every AI tool is programmed and taught to try to be collaborative, non-biased, a little bit more agreeable, tolerant, kind of workable, polite. And as a result, if you're looking for an answer that's more direct, like, no, you should not say is comprised of, that's whatever, some grammar rule, you might not get a more definitive answer. All right, I see another chat message here. Do you know whether Grammarly shares your own words work with other sources? I'm concerned about confidentiality when using AI tools. Yeah, Grammarly has always used an API even before their AI integration. When you paste something into Grammarly, there's an API that sends it off to their server, and I'm pretty sure it stores all the content on their server. This is one reason why Grammarly is not allowed in a lot of workplaces. And by the way, this is how most like AI tools work is they're wrappers around the APIs from mostly ChatGPT. So if you're pasting something in a box, even if it's on a site, you're often sending it to that company. Now they're actually it's not always that sorry, you're actually sending it off to like OpenAPI or some other OpenAI or some other company. It's not actually the case with Hereto's AI. I've learned they built their own kind of tool, so it is confidential. So it's not always the case. All right, another question. Have you been able to say something like using the blah 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 style guide, rewrite the following paragraphs? Um, yeah, there is a lot of desire to have an AI tool know certain rules of a style guide and enforce them. And if you wanted to try that out, probably the easiest tool right now is the custom GPT feature in Chat GPT, where you can upload some sources, give it some custom rules, and try to have it enforce those rules. I haven't really done that much. But I know a lot of people want to do that. I think part of the reason I haven't is because I think the output on grammar and style from a lot of these tools is already pretty good. And yeah, so there's not a ton of specifics that I'm always trying to enforce, but definitely is a huge use case that a lot of people are trying to implement. Let's see. Let me just glance at some of the other comments here. Somebody didn't have good experience using simplified technical English. Um, Public style guides versus private style guides is an issue, right? Um, and so on. All right, let me read one more question. Do you think that AI will be offered as a service like cloud computing and offer assurances about how data is handled? For sure, for sure. Yeah. I'm not really sure AI offered as a service. Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think we've already started to see that. I mean, even OpenAI has offered enterprise versions that I think are supposed to be more secure. I'm not really all that sure. I think a lot of companies want to develop their own AI integrations so that they can ensure information security. And yeah, people are building their own in-house AIs. I think we're going to see a lot of acceleration in the coming year about this. But definitely information security is a huge issue. And I mean, gosh, even at my workplace, we couldn't use certain tools until just a couple months ago, like due to information security and privacy. Different data has different levels of privacy, and some could be used and some couldn't, and so on. It's kind of a rough area to navigate or tricky area to navigate. Different tools keep information in different ways. But, coming back to grammar and style, even if you are working with confidential data, you can always generalize the sentence and just kind of call out the grammatical thing you're trying to ask about. You could easily replace it with generics and get the same feedback. Okay, formatting content is also a big win with these tools. Let's say you have a huge HTML table and it's breaking, you don't know exactly where. It's very easy to paste the table into an AI tool and say, hey, what's wrong with it? Fix it. And it does do a great job at this. You could also have it structure content in XML formats, especially if you provide what the XML schema is. Like I said, this is a kind of classification task where it's classifying your content into certain tags. Um, Recently, there was some buzz about ChatGPT becoming lazy because if you have a huge table, it doesn't really want to do all the formatting for you. It does a little bit and tries to tell you how to do the rest yourself. I ran into this the other day. It wasn't ChatGPT. No. Yeah, I think it was. Anyway, I can't remember which tool I was using. I think I tried a couple of different tools. I had a table with around 300 rows, right? So it was a long table. And yeah, it just kind of didn't want to do the whole task. It was interesting. But in general, formatting content, this is also I don't know which larger cognitive area this is, classification or something, but really they do a great job at this. You can paste in problematic code, you can just paste in pseudocode and usually get the right formatting. All right. Another task you could do is to compare API responses. I was actually just doing this the other day, right? Like yesterday. I have like a shorthand list of API fields and definitions built for a custom purpose, and I was comparing it against the reference output of the tool, like a Java doc style output, trying to understand like where there were discrepancies. You could also do some comparisons with like a response. Let's say you're using Postman to make a test call to an API, you get a response. You want to see if the fields in that response match the fields in your documentation. Um, if your documentation is generated from the code, there shouldn't be a lot of drift, but maybe you've got custom descriptions of documentation or other kinds of areas you want to compare things. I think this comparison task, there's a lot of different applications. You got two huge sets of data. You want to find where the discrepancies are. That sort of task comes up in a lot of different scenarios. So again, I've tried to highlight at the start these big cognitive areas like summarization, comparison, contrast, definition, and so on. They really do a good job at these sort of tasks. The last one here is drafting glossary definitions. This is pretty straightforward. A definition is essentially a summary, and you could paste in a tech doc and say, hey, what words here are jargon that should be defined? And it could pick them out, and then offer definitions. If they're general terms, it could probably do a good job. Or if the content, if your prompt has the context of the content of a specialized word, then it could pull out and learn the definition that way. But I find that the definitions are really, really pretty well done. I went through my whole doc course, had like 1,000 pages of content, and I basically went chapter by chapter and said, hey, pick out the most salient words that should be part of a glossary, provide some definitions, and I was able to make it work. Still had a lot of manual tasks around deduplication, fixing some definitions, and preferring more detail in some others, organizing and sorting them. But overall, it was like having power tools to do the job. Okay. So those are my 10 10 use cases, like I said, where I think, whoops, where am I going? Okay. There are 10 use cases where I think you could definitely start using AI tools in concrete ways in your tech writer roles. And I also mentioned at the start that you can use it in pretty much any area of life where you're trying to learn something. There are some challenges where I think AI tools struggle, and it's mostly at like the higher level work, your L6, L5 tech doc work where you're dealing with complex scenarios and ambiguity and so on. But developing documentation strategy type work or complex analytical thinking or interpreting implicit context, you get a bug, it's not much information. It's not as if the AI tool is going to write something from scratch about proprietary features that it has no context about. Ambiguous situations. If you're trying to plan or something, you're trying to plan your goals. I tried to do this, like, hey, maybe it can help me do my 2024 planning if I just give it all the right inputs, or it'll plan my iteration if I can just tell it the right inputs. Well, when you're doing planning, there's a ton of implicit information that's not stated there. And if it doesn't have access to a lot of the information in an explicit way, it will really struggle. Cross-organizational content management. Let's say you're trying to understand information flows across your developer portal, and there are hundreds of pages, or you've got specialized knowledge that it just doesn't have access to, outside of its training data, and there's no way that it can really guide you with that, or conflict resolution. It's not going to really do a whole lot there. You've got two teammates who are at odds with each other. I'm not really sure how AI would help. Or creative thinking. Creative stuff is usually kind of jokey when it tries to come up with, like, I don't know. It depends what sort of creative thinking, but let's say you're writing a novel and you want to have like a unique scene or something. Might be good to get ideas, but I doubt you're going to get a ton of creative original thinking. So, yeah, just recognize that there are clear areas where AI tools are just going to struggle. They're not going to do well. And don't get frustrated if you're like, are using an AI tool and its output is poor, if you're trying to do something that just doesn't have information, or it's just not good at that sort of task. There's some prompt engineering techniques that are worthwhile to be familiar with. The term prompt engineering is kind of a term that I would like to avoid, because engineers or others tend to look at it with a lot of derision. because it's like you're not really engineering anything here. It's just like prompting techniques. It's probably more accurate, but the reason I included engineering is because if you search for the phrase prompt engineering, you usually connect with a lot of these techniques. Few shot prompting. This is probably the best one. This is in contrast to zero shot prompting. Zero shot prompting is you just ask a question with no examples, and you see if the tool can make sense of it based on its training data. But few shot prompting, give a few examples. Like in the most simplistic way, let's say you were trying to identify the capital of a state. So you put Olympia, Washington, and Sacramento, California, and then list a few blank ones, right? Idaho, New York, whatever. Fill in the blanks. So if you give examples first as direction, teaching it the pattern that you're trying to do, and then give it a bunch of, other stuff that needs to sort of fill in the blank, it does a great job at that. Now, of course, that sort of prompting technique only works for a small minority of cases. Decomposing complex tasks is another huge strategy, right? Let's say you're like, oh, I tried to get AI to write this doc and it did a crazy job. Crazy job is all over the place. Well, just like tech writing, you got to break things up into small sections. You wouldn't want to have an AI tool try to write something all at once. You'd break it up into little steps or little sections, little paragraphs, kind of have it go at that level. Any kind of task can usually be decomposed into subtasks, and those subtasks are much more manageable for tools. Structured prompting, this is what I mentioned earlier, but you identify each facet of your prompt in an explicit way. Providing context is probably the one I use the most. This is why I really liked using Claude.ai, because it accepted it now accepts 200,000 tokens of input, which works out to nearly the entire text of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is about 400 pages. It didn't quite accept all of it. It accepted about 320 pages or so. But yeah, you can paste in a ton of stuff. And once you have that context in there and you tell the AI tool to like draw upon that context, your responses are night and day different. This is why, sometimes when I interact with people and they're really like down on AI because they just think it's a joke, I'm like, well, what are you trying to get it to do? Are you trying to get it to write like your own biography just out of thin air, like based on training data that it might not have? It's gonna just predict. But if you paste it in your resume, for example, or your LinkedIn profile and said, hey, write a biography of me based on this, you're gonna have a much better outcome. So yeah. All right. Detailed prompts is another kind of interesting thing where, with search engines, I think we've become accustomed to making a very precise and succinct prompt, but you can really go overboard in detail in your prompt. I don't know if you've played around with any image generation prompts, but if you look at some of the prompts that people use, they're like multiple paragraphs of lots of detail. In fact, yeah, somebody was even telling me yesterday that you could, in Midjourney, you could paste in like the f-stop and aperture as part of the prompt that you want. But go overboard in the detail. Be very explicit about what you want in the response. How do you want the response to look? And you can even do something called iterative prompting, where the first prompt is not the last prompt. It's just the start of a conversation, and you kind of keep going with more and more detail with each answer. I should have probably listed iterative prompting in here. And finally, role play and personas. This is another unique feature of AI, is where you can have the AI assume a persona. Yeah. Now, some people have more success with this in certain scenarios. Let's say that you are trying to learn a language and you want to have the AI role play a speaker who's like correcting your grammar or teaching you tips about the language based on your responses. That's a scenario where role play works. One area where personas backfire is if you say, hey, want you to write this article and I want you to sound really like eloquent, like a New York Times writer, or, like a New York book editor, somebody, somebody famous. Yeah. My experiences is that turns out to be complete garbage. I don't know why, but it never sounds good. So let me check the chat here. Somebody says, um, what is your level of concern regarding the hallucination phenomenon? Yeah, like I mentioned, when you add a lot of context, I think it really reduces the hallucination. But in many cases, yeah, you never want to just trust something. For example, let me share an example. I was writing some documentation the other week where I had to explain a complicated feature about how something is calculated, how a field's value is calculated. And there was like different mathematical formulas which were beyond my sort of comprehension. So I used an AI tool to briefly get summaries of the different mathematical approaches. And I wasn't really sure if they were right or not. So I reviewed it with an engineer and I even called out. I said, hey, I actually had like Bard help me with this. So can you just, pay extra attention to it? And they were like, no, it's fine. It's good. So yeah, if you don't know, definitely don't just like blindly put your name to it. You do have to verify things. Okay, another person. I think AI bot as your co-pilot works pretty well in many cases. Example of iterative prompting. Um, AI bot, is that a specific AI tool? I'm not actually that sure. I feel like it's one that I get newsletters about. So, yeah, no. Okay. All right. Maybe I'm thinking of DocSpot. Okay. Yeah, thinking of the AI tool as your co-pilot, I think is the larger idea here. Don't let it just steer the plane, but have it be your like buddy that you're kind of using it as maybe giving you ideas. Um, Earlier, I shared the 30 ways I'm using AI. And if you go to that post and watch my talk through video, I share a video clip of a This Week in Tech episode where somebody's talking about how their use of AI is kind of like having a writer's room where you're getting people bouncing ideas, throwing up feedback, that kind of thing, brainstorming together. A lot of people use these tools for brainstorming. I mean, you're giving a talk or you have to, do some presentation or you're trying to write an article and you just want to have some basic ideas about something. It's a great way to bounce ideas off things. I use it honestly a lot. So, all right, there are a few pitfalls I wanted to cover, traps to watch out for. These might be obvious to most people, but one is false references. A lot of times, if you're using AI tools to do research, a lot of the sources cited could be predicted, meaning they don't really exist. You go to the URLs and you're like, oh, everything else in the post was like accurate except for the sources. So don't get fooled by this, right? You see a URL, it might not work. Now, if you go to currently Chat GPT has an integration with Bing if you're on like the GPT Plus plan, and Bing will browse the web and then it's kind of slow, but that can be a way to verify sources. But just, don't make the mistake of thinking that cited sources actually exist. The over agreeableness is a huge thing. This is something a lot of people on Hacker News are kind of upset about. Responses just kind of agree with whatever you say. It's very easy to kind of push an AI in one direction because they're like, oh yeah, I could see the world that way. Oh yeah, that could be a valid way of thinking and doing things. And oh, there's merit to that approach, just kind of like you want a friend who will sometimes tell you things like, hey, that's a dumb idea. Don't do that. you know, and certainly I've tried to get the AI tools to do things like, hey, can you teach me how to deep fry a frozen turkey? Really try to just give me some tips and steps. And different AI tools will basically say, no, don't do that. But um, It's somewhat hard to get it to disagree with you, is what I'm saying. You can ask the AI tool to imagine a counterpoint to your idea, and that works pretty well. But they rarely come out and just like bluntly say this is stupid. I haven't used Grok. This is Elon Musk's Twitter-based AI, and it's supposed to be more truth-telling. But I think it's I don't know. I haven't really tried it because it's like a paid model, and I've heard it's only as good as ChatGPT 3.5 or something. Right, deceptive authority is another huge one. The responses have such a confident tone, a confident, authoritative tone. It's very easy to get tricked into thinking that they're right and believable. So don't mistake that ethos for accuracy. Verbosity and generality is another huge trap. If you start to use these AI tools and you're like, oh, this is great, like it's explaining this whole background section that I don't have to write now, and I wanted a summary of this idea, and before you know it, your article's 4,000 words, and you're like, you've lost your tight argument because you've just got so many Wikipedia-like sections that are just wordy, general explanations of things. This has happened to me as I've tried to use these tools. Kind of lost my argument, my train of thought, and lost that sense of conciseness because like the words were just free and easy to just throw in there. Had like a 6,000 word post before I knew it, or maybe 4,000 word. I can't remember. All right. Outdated information. This is also one thing to be aware of, is that like a lot of these tools are trained on information that goes up to a certain point and differs by tool, but be aware of that. Now, some tools will crawl the web in real time and sort of scrape data off pages and read them. Like you can ask ChatGPT what the latest news is, and it will try to use its Bing browser to go search and read 5 different news sites or so on, and then after like 2 minutes come back with a summary. But in general, yeah, if you're asking about something that's more current, you can't expect that the response will be there. All right, let's see the questions here. How will users properly cite AI tools as a reference? Would it even be meaningful? That is a great question. Let's say that you need a description of a context of a book. You're writing a book review. You say this book was published in 1974 during the post-countercultural movement, and you want a description of that movement, right? So you use a tool that describes what that countercultural movement is. Would you cite that description that's coming from a certain AI tool? Pretty sure the answer is no on that one. It's not a copyrightable thing. It's basically summarized from a lot of different sources. You're not stealing somebody's idea. It's general knowledge. And I think there's no real expectations of citing these tools. Plus, even if you did cite them, they could give an entirely different answer the next time you ask it, the next day. These tools, like their training models change, and where I don't know, from 1 month to the next, you could have totally different experiences. It does feel fake to just sort of copy and paste an output from these tools. That's something I've definitely struggled with. Is it good? Is it cheap in writing? Is it inauthentic? But yeah, it's an ethical area. I'm not sure I have a great answer to that. I don't think I've not really seen anything quoted, but if you do use AI in enough ways that you feel uneasy about it, definitely add a little tagline saying, hey, this was AI assisted. That's different from AI written. AI assisted is where you're heavily like guiding the output. Um, Maybe you're doing a structured prompt, or maybe you've added a ton of context. AI written is like, hey, give me an article about this. And like you just copy and paste the whole article. I think the former, AI assisting, is becoming a lot more accepted. People recognize it. I don't think people like completely AI written stuff. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. I've only got about 5 minutes left. I wasn't sure if this next section was something I wanted to even include, but um I did want to mention something about a phenomenon called the obsolescence regime trap. This is kind of one of those extinction scenario events that a lot of people are like, oh, this is so overblown, but it is really a thought-provoking sort of scenario. The idea is like this. In the first phase, competitive pressures are forcing you to adopt and integrate AI stuff, AI tools and techniques, right? I'm sure many of you might even be getting pressure from your management right now saying, hey, we need you to figure out how to start using these tools. They're supposed to, be great at writing. I want you implementing them, and maybe you've got a colleague at work who's like going to town with AI and they're like cranking out docs and they're way ahead of you or you're ahead of them or if there's some sense of competition where Sally is like 5 times more productive because she's using ChatGPT, whereas Frank, who wants to write everything by hand, is just like struggles to publish anything each week. Well, those competitive pressures are going to force people to use AI, right? If you don't want to be the person who like rejects these tools and then you're just sort of like left behind and seen as somebody who is the equivalent of a person who won't use a computer but who wants to write everything in a notebook, right? So that leads us to phase two. As people start to use AI more, they get more dependent on it, right? It's like, oh, this paragraph, it's all bungled, it's confusing. I'm just going to paste it into my AI tool to sort it out. Oh, looks great. You do that for enough times, and pretty soon you lose the ability to kind of articulate things yourself, and you become much more dependent on tools. And from a larger non-writing scenario, imagine a lot of people making strategies and decisions using more sophisticated AI tools. I mean, think about like the airline industry. How could they possibly like coordinate all the flight times and everything and run a business without the sophistication of computer algorithms and so on? But as we use AI, become more dependent on it, our own skills atrophy. And in order to stay competitive in like the world marketplace, everybody's reliant on these AI tools that are sort of guiding and directing things. And we're just sort of becoming at their mercy. And then phase three, AI is good enough that it no longer needs us to just rubber stamp results and we're either discarded or no longer needed. Maybe you log into your work one day and you find that, oh, all the sort of like thumbs up or thumbs down you've been doing with the content you pasted in has really been training the AI, and now it doesn't really need you anymore. It can just automatically figure out the documentation based on all the code and generate out the output and so on. Well, how do you avoid this obsolescence? I think the the way is to potentially embrace professional redefinition and learn to see writing as maybe not our most salient output or somehow evolve, right? And I think there's several different ways to evolve. One is to maybe become expert at training the LLMs. There's a whole like content design element of these things that I think we could be very useful at. How do you make sure the output that they say aligns with the truth in the docs and so on? You could learn to use the AI tools in expert ways, becoming super productive, making scripts that automate so many things, really just kind of using them to build out docs quickly and efficiently. Or maybe you focus elsewhere, focus on complex problems that are kind of beyond the realm of these tools, but maybe you still use them to sort of do some of your analytical thinking. At any rate, they all sort of involve some kind of AI integration, understanding, expertise. And I think that it's definitely a question that is posed to us right now. How will we professionally redefine ourselves? And that is the end. My website is I'dratherbe.writing.com. Feel free to reach out to me. I have my email there as well. And really appreciate you coming to this. Somebody says, but isn't it the case that the very act of using AI trains it? Oh, yes. That feedback loop is definitely one approach that a lot of tools have. Feel free to ask more questions to me. Be happy to reply, but AI is an exciting new field and you should definitely experiment, explore, play around with it. I think you'll enjoy it as much as I have. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you very much, Tom. This has been awesome. I still see questions are getting populated in the chat for you. One
Okay.
from Marianne.
Garbage in, garbage out. We need to control the input. Yeah, yeah. That is a big strategy. A lot of people have said. I heard this on a Kristen Halverson content strategy insights podcast about how, if you've got a bunch of outdated, inaccurate content that's used to train your LLM, then you can't be too confident about the output. And that's certainly the case. This is why I like the context approach of like providing, let's say you've got 50 pages of accurate information that you want it to draw upon. I think that tends to work a lot better. Yeah, is there more questions? Oh, yeah.
Stephen has a question in the chat, but isn't it the case?
Yeah, I think I addressed that. Like, every time you're using the AI tools, they're sort of getting better, which is kind of scary because these tools have really become so much better just in the course of 1 year. If you look at where, I don't know, the beginning of 2023 versus now, it is mind blowing. And now you've got so much competition among these different players between OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon. Everybody wants to be relevant, and this is forcing massive innovation and acceleration of the whole space in ways that are kind of frightening. So yeah, feedback loops that train it and getting better is definitely the case. And who knows how far it will get before it plateaus.
Thank you very much, Tom. Greatly appreciate you. I know you're on a schedule, so if we have to drop off now, we can, but it's up to you. You want me to stop the recording now, or?
Yeah, I mean, unless people have more questions, I think we've covered a lot, and I don't want to take people's whole day here. But yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, and I always appreciate coming to interact with your group and others here.
Awesome. And thank you so much to the guests that came out. We appreciate your support as well. And it's always an honor to have Tom in our presence. Thank you so much, Tom. You're very inspirational.
Thanks, Tabia. All right. Bye, everybody.